America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Monday, May 9th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Associate Professor of History at Claremont McKenna College, Lily Geismer. Author of Left Behind, the Democrats' failed attempt to solve inequality. Also on the program today, protests against a forthcoming overturning of Roe v. Wade grow as Mitch McConnell, Republican activists, and governors, Republican governors, hint that a federal ban is next. In a holiday speech, Putin says Russia had to strike Ukraine. It's more than 60 feared dead in a Russian bombing of a Ukrainian school. Joe Biden, meanwhile, announces yet another $150 million worth of weapons sale for Ukraine, as the U.S. agenda clearly now to get a win. The Department of Education is set to roll back Betsy DeVos's Title IX weakening. National Labor Relations Board accused Starbucks of unfair labor practices in Buffalo. No word yet from Howard Schultz and how this impacts his Holocaust story. Amazon fires managers at the recently unionized warehouse in Staten Island. The Taliban reinstates head-to-toe coverings for women throughout Afghanistan, perhaps in an homage to the forthcoming Supreme Court ruling in this country. And Sinn Féin have won a majority of seats in Northern Ireland's Assembly. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Another week of, well, it's getting a little crazier out there. And with us, as always, Emma Vigland. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Sam.
Hope you had a good weekend.
Yes, I did. How about you?
I did, I guess. A little rainy, and so a couple of the Little League games were
Canceled,
which was a bummer for me. I was looking forward to it. Saul was excited because he ended up just watching Sonic 2, going to the movies, so he was psyched.
How did you feel about Jim Carrey's performance? Your favorite?
The only movies that I can handle with Jim Carrey are the Sonic movies, but the Sonic one was significantly better.
Or if
than
he's
Sonic
like
2.
really dour in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, something like that.
I mean, I guess so. He's okay in that one, but I would say Sonic is his best work, and Sonic 1, I thought maybe a little bit, Sonic 2 was heartwarming because Sonic got some friends, but
that's nice.
But I thought Sonic 1 was just a better.
That's the essential one.
It was just a better film. It's just a better film.
If you're gonna see one, see the original.
It's not like the Godfather movies.
No.
Oh, you're a Godfather 2 guy?
I mean, I don't really care.
Okay, man.
All right. Let's get to this. This is. I mean, this is. I think the thing that really started to make me really nauseous about this was the tweet from the White House, frankly. But the idea that we would be on the precipice of the greatest and maybe the single most rollback of individual rights in this country that we have ever seen. I mean, certainly we have examples of following the Civil War of like physical violence against black politicians and black people who were accruing wealth. And certainly we have the Jim Crow era and a court that was allowing for proxy ways to deny black people votes when we talk about the 1890s through, frankly, the 1960s, early 60s. But we are on the precipice of the greatest, most explicit rollback of individual rights in the history of this country. It has been legal in this country for a woman to decide what she will do as far as maintaining a pregnancy for 50 years. And we are moving into an era where in at least 25, maybe up to 28 states, as of maybe July of this year, women will be forced to carry pregnancies to term. They will be forced to give birth. At least that's what the state intention is. And so the idea that this would happen without any protest, or that there is some measure of just protest, that would be off limits is absurd. Here is neighbors of Justice Kavanaugh, literally his neighbor, organized a protest. What's her name?
I'm not sure, but she's done this before, right? Do we have her name? Bradley's getting it, but you know those block parties got to be awkward.
Her name is Lacey Wooten Hallway, and she has been conducting a lot of demonstrations outside Kavanaugh's house even before the decision was leaked. So she's kind of been on the ground in Chevy Chase, Maryland, for quite some time.
Okay, so so his neighbors have protested. There's about 100 people out there, and here it is.
We will not go back. 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 We will not go back.
Now, I should say, Chuck Schumer lives in Brooklyn. And almost on any weekend, not any weekend, but like, maybe 3 times, 4 times a year, depending on what's going on, there will be a crowd of more than 100 people out in front of his building.
Which is a high rise, right?
It's not it's a bigger building in Brooklyn. It's right by Prospect Park, and people are protesting. Now, think of how many times we have seen outrage from the media, how many times we have seen the White House tweet about you shouldn't be protesting this. And let's also be clear. There have been multiple times over the years, including in the 2012 decision of the ACA, it was reported in the Wall Street Journal that there have been lobbying by conservatives on the court. In 2012, it was of John Roberts, to try and pressure him to reverse, to really sink all of the ACA. There is every reason to believe that this leak, because of the Wall Street Journal editorial from 2 weeks ago, before this leak came out, where it was clear that there was pressure being asserted on these 5 Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices, a couple of whom were wavering in their decision about abortion, to hold tight. So it's not like there isn't political pressure that we have documented reporting about that is taking place just because it's happening behind closed doors.
I mean, there's articles about how anti-abortion activists were getting impatient with Amy Coney Barrett. Just go down the list. But this is beyond the pale. They want the pressure to be exerted onto them at cocktail parties and at legal functions. But if it's so this is the White House tweet here? Yeah. But if it's the actual people doing it, that's beyond the pale.
And here is Jen Psaki. POTUS strongly believes in the constitutional right to protest, but that should never include violence, threats, or vandalism. Okay, here's the point. We played that clip. There hasn't been a single report not a single report of violence, threats, or vandalism. There was 100 people out there in the rain standing on the sidewalk or in the street saying, we will not go back. And so by setting this up like this, all of a sudden they're creating a straw person. The fact is, I'm old enough to remember where there was a Republican senator on the floor of the Senate talking about why he could understand why people were threatening federal judges. We didn't see any of that. And yet the White House is out there making this now about the threats to the judiciary. And the reason why they're doing that is because they're doing nothing else. Nothing else. They're not talking about reforming the Supreme Court. They're not talking about court packing. They're not talking about pressuring anybody in the Senate to bust a filibuster. None of it.
So there's no violence, threats, or vandalism that we've seen.
There's no concern for their personal safety. None of it.
But this is state violence that these conservative priests are imposing on half of the population. Women are going to seek alternative methods to end their pregnancies, which could be dangerous. Hopefully there's, it's different from before the Roe times and there's more access to abortion pills, but still, this is the state forcing women to carry pregnancies to term, and that is state violence in and of itself.
Meanwhile, here's Justice Clarence Thomas also complaining about he is at a speech. I don't know how he got to go at a speech with all the threats and violence. How could he have possibly left his house?
He needed to be in a panic room.
Justice Thomas, people need to live with outcomes we don't agree with. Now, it's quite possible things are so tense at the Thomas household that this is his way of trying to signal to his wife, Ginny Thomas, that you got to get over this whole 2020 election thing that you were part and parcel of in the storming of the Capitol. It bodes ill for a free society that the court can't be an institution that can be bullied into giving you just the outcomes you want. Now, of course, remember, Ginny Thomas was pounding Mark Meadows with texts, not get the people out. You got to tell Trump to do something. She was saying, you guys got to pursue this.
Yeah.
Because Joe Biden stole the election. And as far as protests, put this one up too. I'm also old enough to remember when this Supreme Court, no, that's not it. When the Supreme Court ruled that in Massachusetts, the buffer zone that they had set up to keep anti-abortion protesters from harassing and terrorizing women who were going in to end their pregnancies, the Supreme Court struck down that abortion clinic buffer zone law. Scroll down into this piece and you'll see some of the quotes. Keep going, because you've got John Roberts saying that there's a room for that the First Amendment is the most important thing. Here it is. Even though the act is content neutral, it still must be narrowly tailored to serve a significant interest. The buffer zones burden substantially more speech than necessary to achieve the Commonwealth's asserted interest, which is to protect these women. So here it is, like the standard in which, and just to be clear, the standard in which these people are using, and by these people I mean the justices, is that to abridge free speech in the question, I guess, of abortion, one must need an incredibly high threshold. But of course, whining that, 100 people are out in front of someone's house saying, we will not go back, crosses that threshold.
You just have to live with decisions that you don't agree with. You just have, just like my wife, you just have to live with decisions you don't agree with. Yeah, right. Women will be forced to live with this decision, and they'll have to work around this decision. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we have to go quietly into the good night. Give me a break. You don't have, the mentality of these justices as if they're above reproach and they can make these decisions that affect hundreds of millions of people's daily lives, and that because they have lifetime appointments and because they're ostensibly outside of politics, they're free from consequences. Sorry, no dice.
And we should say, this whole process is clearly incredibly political. That's what that leak was about. I mean, it was about pressuring. It wasn't about maybe 100 protesters are going to change Kavanaugh's mind. No, this was about locking in those conservative justices and voting that way. And if they actually ever do find the leaker, I think that's going to be quite obvious. All right, we're going to get to Lily Geismer in just a moment. We've got some sponsors for today's show. And we're also going to be talking about where they're going next, because it does not end with this. This is just the beginning. Believe me. Folks, 11 million open jobs, I think, was the last report. If you want to find someone good for your job, you need to know where to go. Certain people who work on this show make my life much easier. Got them second order from ZipRecruiter. If you own a growing business and you need to hire, ZipRecruiter makes hiring much easier because they do all the heavy lifting for you. And right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter uses powerful technology to find and match the right candidates up with your job. Makes it super easy. They got a great user interface. They organize these things really well. You can easily review the recommended candidates. Then you just easily invite your top choices to apply. Plus, ZipRecruiter has a complete suite of tools that makes it easy to filter, review, and rate your candidates. No more, messy spreadsheets or huge notes on the back of envelopes, as I used to do back in the day. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. No wonder ZipRecruiter is the #1 rated hiring site based on G2 satisfaction ratings as of January 1st, 2022. Just a reminder, that's the way we got old Brendan. He's not old, but he's emeritus. He's still working on the show, but remotely now. That's the way we found Brendan. We found Bradley through Brendan. There you go. Electricity. ZipRecruiter has staffed a huge portion of this show, and it was super easy, and we did great with it. The hardest thing you have to do is remember our URL. That is ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's where you go to try ZipRecruiter for free. Once again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/MAJORITY. ZipRecruiter, it's the smartest way to hire. Also, the show is sponsored today by something I lean on every day, and that is Liquid IV. 1 stick of Liquid IV Hydration Multiplier in 16 ounces of water hydrates you faster and more efficiently than water alone. Plus, Liquid IV comes in refreshing flavors like watermelon, lemon lime, strawberry, pina colada, one that I've been going to lately, tangerine. Liquid IV contains 5 essential vitamins, B3, B5, B6, B12, and vitamin C. With Liquid IV, you get 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. And Liquid IV is made with premium ingredients. It is non-GMO. It is free from gluten, dairy, and soy. The science of cellular transport technology is what makes Liquid IV so effective. It's designed to enhance rapid absorption of water, other key ingredients into the bloodstream. Maybe you had too much to drink. Maybe you need to get hydrated fast. Maybe you've been working out. You need to get hydrated. Maybe you've been doing plane travel. Comes in very easy, packable, small packets. You bring a dozen with you on a trip. Liquid IV is also on a mission to change the world. The company's donated over 20 million servings globally. We all,
yeah,
it's
I
a
use
big
it all the
part of
time.
it. I mean, everybody who watches
I've got
the
my
show
family
knows
to use it too.
Grab Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco, or you can get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order when you use promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Experience better hydration today at liquidiv.com. Promo code MajorityRep. MajorityRep. Also, lastly, everyone in this office, because, well, for two reasons. One, spring started late in the Northeast. It's still a little chilly, but because it started late, the blossoms came out late on the fruit trees, and there was nothing frozen, and so we're gonna be looking forward to some good Korean pears. Why?
Wow.
Because I planted a fast-growing tree from fastgrowingtree.com last year, and it pumps out it doesn't pump them out. It grows them within a year. Spring and summer is nearing. It's time to make your outdoor space feel more like a yard and less like a plant cemetery. When it comes to caring for your plants, know-how matters. That's why fastgrowingtrees.com experts curate thousands of plant varieties that are going to thrive in your specific climate and location. For me, I'm growing zone 5. You order online or over the phone, your plants are shipped to your door in 1 or 2 days, plus their growing and care advice is available 24/7. Doesn't matter if you're looking for increased privacy or shade or adding natural beauty or fruit trees, Fast Growing Trees have the perfect plants and expertise to help you find them. Even if you've never had a green thumb, they'll make you feel like you do. 1 million home gardeners have already seen what fastgrowingtrees.com can do for them. Plus, with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, you can trust everything will be healthy for years to come. Honestly, I have ordered and I've bought plants and trees from many places. I have never had the success that I've had, but for fastgrowingtrees.com. In fact, I was using them before they became a sponsor.
Wow.
Yep.
That's how you know it's legit.
Yep. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/majority right now. You'll get 15% off your entire order. Get 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/majority. fastgrowingtrees.com/majority. Okay. Want to welcome back to the program Lily Geismer. She is an associate professor of history at Claremont McKenna College, author of Left Behind, the Democrats' Failed Attempt to Solve Inequality. Lily Geismer, welcome back to the program. I think it's been a couple of years. We've had you on for your first book, Don't Blame Us, about suburban liberals dealing with the Massachusetts corridor around, I think it was 128, and a couple of pieces that you wrote about that. And now you've written a book about really the ascendancy of the DLC. I just want to start, why was that the next obvious book for you to write?
Well, thank you so much for having me back on and for such a good memory of my my last appearances. The book Left Behind actually emerged in many ways from my my first book, which was looking at suburban liberals in Massachusetts. And the book ended with Mike Dukakis and his time as governor of Massachusetts, and then his run for presidency in 1988. I'm sorry. And I was really interested in this as I was looking at Mike Dukakis, his embrace of tech as a solution to solving economic growth in Massachusetts, and how that then led to his being nominated for the presidency in 1988, and also his increasing use of the market and ideas of sort of using the market to do good. And I just wanted to think about how this was actually true of the Democratic Party more broadly. So how it became increasingly invested in using the private sector to do the work that was once largely it was advocated by Democrats that the government should do those kinds of programs, especially to help poor people and address problems of inequality.
I grew up in Massachusetts. I remember the Massachusetts Miracle that was basically bringing a lot of those tech companies to that 128 corridor. And I remember when Bill Clinton was elected and looking around going like, I remember exactly where I was, and I remember, everybody sort of celebrating, and I thought like, oh, I can understand why there's a sigh of relief, but really, I was not that excited. And my understanding of the DLC and that whole turn that took place through that time was as a defensive measure. And I mix into this also Tony Coelho, who was a California Democrat who started raising a bunch of corporate money. And all these things sort of took place simultaneously. But your book sort of rejects that and makes the argument that this was actually sort of like a wrong, but affirmative, like ideological shift. Give us a sense before we get to that part of it, how these people, and a lot of this came out of like the Southwest, how these Democrats perceive the Democratic Party, and then talk about where the shift came from.
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. So the thing that I tried to understand, I think the classic story of the DLC and the Democratic Party more broadly since the late 1960s is that everything that they did was in defensive reaction to the Republicans. And so the Republican Party is really the dominant story of kind of politics from the 70s onwards. And so when people like Bill Clinton and the cohort of New Democrats who are around the DLC were advocating for the market, it was all just kind of this, it's based on the idea of sort of how people think about it as triangulation, which was Dick Morris's famous strategy in the 1986 election. And so that it was just kind of stealing from the Republicans. And I wanted to look at how it wasn't just, there's a component of reacting to Republicans, but they actually really believed in the ideas of the market and to do good. And it is a bigger story than just Bill Clinton and goes back really to people like Tony Coelho and a broader group of Democrats who come into office in 1974 under the name at the time of the Watergate Babies. And Dukakis is one of them, as are people like Tim Wirth and Gary Hart, who all have the idea that they're called the Watergate Babies because they came in 1974 after Watergate, but really who they were opposing was the traditional Democratic Party. And they believed that the Democratic Party had become too beholden first to sort of ideas of bureaucracy and big government. And the party needed to be more efficient in its approaches to dealing with social problems. They were critical of the Great Society. But the other real problem they had is the Democrats there are two things. One is that they had become too beholden to what they called special interest groups, and especially the labor movement, and needed to kind of readdress its strategies in terms of kind of political strategy to really focus on more middle class, moderate suburbanites who are many of their constituencies, and that was kind of the future. The other big thing was that the party's economic policies were too beholden to Keynesian economic theory and kind of too focused on, especially and with relation to labor, too focused on kind of manufacturing and needed to focus on what becomes new economy sectors like tech, trade, and finance. And so those things together would kind of be the future of the party. So that's really what they sort of begin to advocate in the 1970s, and it really comes to take hold by the 1980s and then the 1990s under Bill Clinton.
But the concept of efficiency, you mentioned that word, right? And as the party transitions to tech, finance, etc., that's a very financial or techie term as opposed to the Keynesian economics of the past. So, how did those interest groups and industries influence that kind of thinking within the party during that time?
It's interesting because I think there's this idea of that they, sort of having those kinds of relationships where they're being sort of influenced in various different ways. And I think a lot of that comes later. There do become, and my book tracks actually especially the Democratic Party's relationship to Silicon Valley. But initially, the part of it has to do with there's a longstanding faith within liberalism and the Democratic Party in sort of technocratic approaches. And so this goes back to the New Deal, which was very technocratic in its nature. And there's a piece of the market itself that's quite kind of technocratic in its approach and is more efficient. And actually, there's a belief that it's more transparent, even though it's been, in many ways, those kind of relationships become not very non-transparent. But I think especially after the 1960s, where you have after Vietnam and then Watergate with this idea of government lying, there's a notion that sort of turning to the market will make it more both transparent, but also more efficient. And bringing in the kind of ideas of the private sector will make government a more effective measure, more effective. And that's really been this ethos that the Democratic Party has really promoted really since the 1970s, or a wing of the Democratic Party. And I think it's become kind of the mainstream idea that you need to make government more efficient. That's sort of how it operates. I mean, the DLC promoted the idea of like, we want to promote opportunity, not government, which is that kind of thinking.
I don't know, for some reason when you mentioned that, it also reminded me of McNamara too, right? I mean, he was brought in from Ford, I mean, to do this with the Vietnam War. Very efficient, or theoretically anyways. But I just want to go backwards just a little bit too, just to get a sense of like where this emanated from, because I know, and then we can talk about also like, you know, what ultimately became their neoliberalism is slightly different from the neoliberalism that came out of like Mont Pelerin and Milton Friedman and that whole crew. But how much of this was also a reaction to the sort of emancipatory politics of the mid 60s? Because I know that, you know, the Democratic Party has a huge shift over the course of like those 20 years from the end of 1940s to you know, the end of the 1960s, where the Democratic Party had never won an election without a majority of white people. And then after 1960, late 1960s, never wins an election with a majority of white people. How much of that played into this? Like when we hear special interests, you know, and I think like in your first book, we see the beginning of the end of the relationship with the unions and the Democratic Party. But also we're talking about other special interests too, right? I mean, and when I hear that, I hear like Black people, women, I mean, and how much of that was a pushback against that type of politics?
It's a combination. And so there's a language so a lot of the language that emerges. And so there's this iteration. So it's the Watergate babies who come into Congress, and they're often known actually as the first neoliberals or Atari Democrats. And they talk a lot about the ideas of shifting away from fairness to opportunity. And so fairness is a word that is deeply embedded in kind of ideas of social justice and the kind of social movements that you're talking about, particularly the civil rights movement. And that it sounds like it's a minor move, but it's actually a major one, that if you can kind of promote ideas of opportunities, everyone has the chance to do that, which actually also is kind of market oriented in its thinking, because it's like the market can give everyone the chance to go ahead to be great. It's also meritocratic. And that goes back to some stuff I talked about in my first book as well. So that's the kind of language that they're using. And the belief is that the party had been too focused on kind of sort of redistribution. And that was sort of the ways in which they were helping redistribution. And then also kind of these ideas of fairness, which is to give every group a say and to help groups in those ways. The Democrats of this kind of ilk are still in language focused on ideas of we want to help everyone, and we believe in equal rights for women, for people of color, but their strategies do point in other ways. And I actually say that the ideology does, just in many ways too. And that's kind of some of the ways that sort of giving the market is giving everyone an opportunity to do that, as opposed to actually taking steps to ensure that that's possible. And those do have their roots in beginning in the 1970s, but really kind of come into being by the 1980s and 1990s.
And was there something about something that was going on, or in the nature of the Southwest, or the fact that there was like sort of I don't know, more expansion going on in the Southwest at that time that led so many of these people who espoused, I guess, this ideology to come from the Southwest?
There's a couple of things that that lead to it, and I can get, if I don't want to be too overly weedsy, but I'll
No,
I'll give
please,
the
please
answer.
do, please do.
So there are two different things that are going on. One is, so it's interesting with the story. I can use the story of Bill Clinton in particular, who's more from the South, but in a state like Arkansas was losing a huge amount of its it lost a huge amount of its industry. That it was a very manufacturing sort of state based on the idea of smokestack chasing, where in the 50s, they brought in all these companies who opened one company towns. But by the 70s, those companies had left and moved production overseas. So they desperately were in need of industry. And people like Bill Clinton see what was going on in Route 128 and Silicon Valley as the solution to the problems of places like Arkansas. So there's this focus on that as the kind of going to save our states. That they also recognize the realignment that you described within the Democratic Party itself. And there's a whole wing of people who become part of the DLC who were Southern moderate Democratic governors like Chuck Robb of Virginia. And they recognize that how the Democrats are going to regain office is by focusing on white swing voters. So the people you described who are leaving the Republican Party, and that some of the ways by the time the DLC comes into by 1985, that was kind of what the language was perceived. So when the DLC starts, it's all white men, primarily from the South and Southwest, and that's part of what the idea of what they're trying to do, that they're worried the party is going to take a different direction. I think it's actually this really interesting moment because there's like sort of this split as to where the Democratic Party could have gone in the 1980s. And this is the approach that they see as kind of critical to both ideologically what the party should do, but also in terms of its electoral strategy.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the idea of wanting to replicate what happened at Route 128 in Massachusetts, in Arkansas, is a prime example of why almost the whole ideology doesn't work. There's just not enough to go around. It's not scalable, and that's ends up being a problem with a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of all of the kind of, I look at this range of different market-based ideas that they promote, especially around things like banking and things like microfinance. And a lot of them are sort of small-scale solutions to much bigger problems. So there is the other issue. I mean, the major thing that's happening that is sort of underneath this, and I gestured to in a couple of places, is that the economy is going through a major recession in the 1970s. And there's this question of sort of, we need to come up with a solution to these problems. And so the future lies in tech and trade and finance, and we need to bring those across the country. And this becomes really part of the Democratic Party's what they're going to offer for the future. So that goes back to the Mike Dukakis example. It is really what Bill Clinton sells in the 1990s, and I think it's really fascinating because to your point of like saying this isn't going to work, like these ideas are still promoted. Like this is the whole turning coal miners into coders. Like it's not. There's this relentless idea in that faith and kind of that the tech industry can solve all of these problems when it's been proven time and time again, it just can't.
Well, I have a theory as to why it's so relentless is because those exact same people are still in power within the Democratic Party. And so they, usually you come in with one idea and it's going to take you for the rest of your career that's the way most people operate. But let me ask you this before, and I want to get into the details of Shore Bank and of microfinance. It's just because you focus on those examples in particular. But why did they win? I mean, and I think we're on the other side of that saga on some level. It's still hanging on white knuckled within the Democratic Party, but I think there's at least a lot of indications that philosophy has died or is in convalescence. But why did they win at that time?
So I think it's a couple of different things. I think that that are happening, and that's a sort of critical question. So, and as I said, there was these moments of kind of, we look back to 1980s where the Democratic Party was, and this moment of kind of that it's often for political historians this moment of kind of failure, that there were two large losses at the presidential level. And so the party, 1984 and 1988 are both really interesting because you had someone like Jesse Jackson in the primary, and that could have been a direction for the party at that point to go after the very special interest groups and to make that the kind of coalition of the party. The DLC promotes this other approach of kind of we focus on moderate, we focus on the kind of moderate swing voters and largely white and not non-voters. That's what the sort of idea that you go after people who are not voting in elections would be the kind of Jesse Jackson approach to this kind of non-voter approach. That's part of what I think leads to sort of these narrow wins. And I think it's really important. Bill Clinton did not win by a huge landslide in 1992. It was a narrow victory with a
he didn't even get
candidate.
50%.
Yes, and so that's some of what happened. I mean, there was a third party candidate who skimmed off a fair amount of, it's a question of where that would have gone. I also think the issue is that one of the things is that Bill Clinton was a tremendously charismatic politician. So I think what I argue happens is that you have the DLC, and then they had this theory that to win for the Democrats to recapture power was to win the presidency, and you focus on the presidency to kind of gain dominance. And they needed a good candidate, and Bill Clinton was rising up through their ranks. They select him to be their chair, and so that becomes really effective. So you have this. I do think the ideology was really powerful, and Bill Clinton became a really, really powerful mouthpiece for it, and that leads to the kind of the winning in 1992. And then I think there's a number of things that happened in 1996, largely having to do with the economic growth of the 90s that leads Bill Clinton to win again. But I think one of the biggest issues for the Democratic Party has been this effort to kind of recapture that moment for so long. I just understand, to kind of try to recreate those dynamics. And I think one of the things has been to focus on these candidates to try to get that way, which has created real problems in the kind of larger infrastructure of the party then. So that goes to the kind of narrow win, but with really long-term consequences. Coupled with my argument would be in the book too, is that we often focus on elections, but actually it's like what happens in office when they enact policy that really matters. And so that there was all of these policies that are put into place that had really long-term and in many ways detrimental effects.
Right. I guess I was asking less about why he won the national election than as opposed to that sort of internecine fight within the Democratic Party. And I mean, I'm trying to remember that I feel like it was his charisma and he talked like a populist too. Like he and Obama had a similar sort of ability to come off as a populist, even though they weren't.
And turn it on during election years. I mean,
without a
in
doubt.
2012, Obama spoke very differently than how he governed.
Oh, yes. I mean, it was very much like an affect as much as it was, Bill Clinton would go to McDonald's and they had to tie him down so he wouldn't go to McDonald's was the in the run up to, I mean, I remember that was the big story about Bill Clinton. And the stories that they would always come out with, he just spent his whole time talking to the guy at McDonald's. And that was they had him jogging to work off his McDonald's. And that was all the, so that in many respects, it was just sort of almost like a luck of a draw in terms of him winning that primary in 1992, I guess.
Well, the primary in 92 was a really complicated one with all these people, and he sort of did come out on top. I mean, he was a profoundly effective politician. And I think the other thing, and so with the DLC component, so they had this whole idea of we expand, opportunity, not government, through free markets was really their mantra. And Bill Clinton was able to sort of, as you said, was able to promote that in a populist language that was really effective. And so this idea, and it was like we're coming in with kind of a new approach, we're new kinds of Democrats. And that notion after 12 years of the Democratic Party not holding power was, I think, was effective and pervasive in a number of different ways. I think the other thing, which I argue in the book, going back to this being affirmative, is Bill Clinton really did believe. So the DLC, and I think he really did help, as I show in the book, help to kind of solidify certain aspects of their policies as well. But he really believed in the idea of the market to do good for poor people. So this idea that you could kind of use the market to do what was traditionally the Democratic Party traditionally achieved through government, that you could sort of use the private sector to do those things. And that's something that he believed, he really had a belief in. So it wasn't just kind of pure political strategy.
I want to get into Shorebank, into the microfinance, but just tell us the concept of doing well by doing good. I mean, that's a nice sort of like, I don't know, a cake and eat it too type of thing, or I can't tell what that is. It's sort of a rationale, maybe.
Well, it's that, and so that my book looks a lot of that kind of language, and using that actually as a way to think about the dominant ethos of the DLC and Clinton, which is this idea that you can use the market to do what government could do, but also that the market can sort of grow at the same time. And so instead of like the traditional democratic approach or liberal approach would be to keep those separate. So you want to do well by doing economic growth and then having compensatory social welfare programs. You can fuse those together so that the private sector can do the work of government. And that's what I look at in the book, is this becomes kind of critical to the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton's governing strategy. Another language that's just have your cake and eat it too is a lot of language of win-wins. So this idea that and the idea of a win-win is that then it doesn't address the fact that like in a capitalist system or when you're using the market, you have wins and losses. And so this idea it's good for everybody. And that's really what becomes the logic of the New Democrats DLC approach to governance.
That's also just Silicon Valley, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like that phrase has been repeated it's very much how, not to bring up Theranos, but they justify their kind of business practices and they attract a lot of neoliberal investors using that ideology, honestly.
Totally. And so that's, I think the thing about that I found, I mean, that's why you have this kind of coalescence of the Democrats with Silicon Valley, is that the ethos is actually quite similar. And so that it's attractive. So it's not just about kind of the money, like let's pay, like well, we're going to like give you lots of donations. It's actually they believed in these ideas as well. And so in the book, I look extensively at their relationship with charter schools, which is a very much like doing well by doing good kind of idea too. And that's kind of, it becomes kind of critical to the language of how I think Silicon Valley and the Clinton version of the Democratic Party, the ideas that they promote.
That's certainly the quote that I'm going to use when I go work for Jeff Bezos in his new initiative that we haven't worked out yet, the details. But well, I talk about Shorebank and how that sort of plays into that whole thing.
Yeah, so one of the things the book tracks is this community development bank called Shorebank, which is based in Chicago, or it was started in the 1970s, and it was the idea that you could use a commercial bank to do economic redevelopment in a low-income community. And they were based in South Shore, which is the neighborhood in Chicago. It's actually where Michelle Obama grew up. And Bill Clinton becomes really taken with this idea that Shorebank is successful in Chicago, and invites the founders to start a bank in the 1980s in Arkansas, based on this model. And Shorebank at the time had also been working with Muhammad Yunus, who was the founder of Grameen Bank, which is kind of seen as the kind of really the founders of microfinance and the ideas of microenterprise in Bangladesh, which is the idea of giving small loans to poor women to help them start their own businesses. And the people from Shorebank tell the Clintons about Yunus. They become really, really taken with that idea. So they bring him to Arkansas as well to start a microenterprise organization in the Arkansas Delta in the 1980s. And then when Bill Clinton's running for president in 1992,
does that have success? I mean, it almost sounds laughable. Like we're gonna get each one of these poor women. They're gonna start their own businesses. Like, who's gonna buy this stuff? Like everybody's got their own business, and everybody's like, I don't know, selling like.
And the cream will rise to the top. The best of the best will come out of it. I mean, so it's just capitalism.
But that's not the theory, isn't that? Like some's going to just like, we're going to get some people to explain. It's like, it's going to sustain everybody. I don't understand.
They don't care. I mean, they probably don't really think about sustaining everybody. They're fine with a certain level of, I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm talking over you, but.
No. I mean, it's an interesting idea because it's like why this, and this was a really, I mean, microfinance and microenterprise in the by the early 2000s was this idea that sort of caught on like wildfire, and especially internationally. And there's questions of if it actually works internationally as well. But I mean, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Prize, and it sort of there's questions if it's working there. But I think the idea that this could work in the U.S. is one of the things that I look at, and what they want to do is actually to use it for two things. One is to do economic redevelopment in these communities that have lost all their businesses, but also to replace welfare. So it's the idea like you don't need to get welfare payments. You can turn your hobby into a business. So like you love to sell coffee cake, like you can do that and promote it. And then you can start, like what the theory behind it is like you'll be really good at selling your coffee cakes. And then you'll start your own coffee cake company, and then you'll employ other people in the town, and they can all work for you. And then you'll have that's the kind of self-sustaining growth. So that's like the idea behind it. And this was, I mean, the Clintons promoted this like crazy in the 90s. And then Hillary Clinton really made it part of her kind of mission as first lady, and then as senator, and then as first lady, actually, as a secretary of state later, internationally. And it's been proven widely not to work in the US for many of the reasons that you can assume. I mean, and so I think it's this very idealistic idea. And so some of the idea of cream rising with the crop, it's this idea that everyone at their core wants to be an entrepreneur. So I think that it's like this entrepreneurial based idea. What I argue in the book and other places is that this is one of the things it does, and this is actually also where it connects to Silicon Valley, because people like the founder of eBay love this. Like they are like really taken with this idea. But it actually sort of like obscures it by calling everyone an entrepreneur. It obscures fundamental class differences. So like Jeff Bezos and the woman selling coffee cake are not the same, but it's sort of putting them in the same category. So you don't address the fact that these people don't have stability. Like that's what you lose when you're an entrepreneur. And if you're taking away welfare at the same time, it has really, really negative impacts.
It seems insane to me on multiple levels, the idea that this is because I think you make the point in the book that like, there's nothing wrong with a microfinance, but to have it be the center point of a way of addressing these things have it be the center. I mean, I think it would be a great add-on.
And at the expense of social programs.
Well, yeah, that's
right,
the point.
yeah,
is that like as an add-on after the fact, but the idea that you're going to have enough micro financed businesses that grow to replace social services, and then the idea that like I'm a woman with one child who makes $18,000 a year. I don't have any intergenerational wealth. I don't have family or friends who are wealthy either, but I'm similarly situated as someone who does have all those things to make a chance I'm making my big life's bet on this coffee cake. It's insane. It's insane to think that this is scalable. I can't wrap my head around how anybody thought that it was. I mean, on some level, I feel like, and this I think is too much of a psychological assessment, but both Barack Obama and Bill Clinton came from very messed up situations where their meteoric rise within the context of our country, I think, blinded them to the reality of like, they just won the lottery. And essentially they won life's lottery, and they just assume everybody else can too.
Well, I think there's a lot. There's so much to that. I think that's, and also many other Democrats who believe in this idea are people who all had success in various different ways and sort of have a faith that that's the way you go forward. And I think absolutely. So the point I make in the book is like, I don't think microfinance or microenterprise is a bad idea in and of itself. Like if you have it on top of having a robust social welfare state, but the idea that this could replace it is faulty. And I think the problem is it then actually leads to, this is where we have increased inequality after the 1990s. So it actually sort of harms and leads to sort of further shrinking the social safety net to the point you have nothing. And for Bill Clinton in particular, like it goes to also his larger promotion of welfare to work, is that he often would talk about this idea of kind of, it's not just the kind of that you'd have the money, but it's also the sort of psychological power of having a job. And so he really believed in this notion that that was good for your kids too, to see you have a job. And that goes to like his own sort of psychoanalysis of his own childhood experience, that like for poor people, they need to have particular kind of notion of a role model of success, and having mothers who work will do that.
How much did the Moynihan report play into their thinking?
I'm trying to think. I mean, there have particular ideas of sort of that that women, you need to have sort of particular ideas of sort of strong families. I mean, I think the other thing that goes to the sort of the Moynihan report, but more the story of sort of the welfare queens from it. And this is another thing I argue in the book, is that in some ways, this is different than the welfare queen argument, because it's sort of saying, it's instead of saying like every poor person is like the potential entrepreneur, but it actually then blames people who are not, who don't follow who don't do that. And so in the book, I use a lot. I mean, Clinton uses classic language of like play hard and work hard and follow the rules, but that inherently stigmatizes people who are not who are purportedly not following the rules, and then those people get incredibly punitive punishment for it, be that losing welfare benefits, but then also this is coupled with all of the crime legislation of the 1990s. So those two things actually come to work hand in hand. So you have this idea of like it's repositioning who is like a good poor person and a bad poor person. So like the successful micro enterprise is like entrepreneur is like a good poor person who's working hard, whereas like anyone else falls into this other category. And is deeply stigmatized and actually like often in prison for it.
And I feel
sorry, I feel like got really dark there.
No, but I feel like that narrative also works the other way in sort of like a Paul Ryan-esque type of thing, because if we set it up so that if you play by the rules, you get a fair shake, the land of opportunity, it also then comes back around and says like, and so if you're not doing well, that's because you're not playing by the rules. And we start to get into sort of like Paul Ryan territory here. It feels like, in terms of that ideology. How is this neoliberalism, this notion of, private-public partnerships, and the idea of like, we're just going to give, we're going to help people in business, and that's going to supplant the role of government. And then, and I should say, we saw this all through the Obama administration in like Cass Sunstein and all sorts of other figures who had this similar ideology. How is that different from the neoliberalism of the Mont Pelerin strain that goes through Milton Friedman?
Yeah, and this is something I look at in my book too, which I was really interested in, is this idea. So oftentimes Clinton is lumped together with this kind of, with these other forms of neoliberalism under Reagan and Friedman and the Mount Pelerin Society. And I see the difference as they still believe in a place for government. And so it's the idea of government as catalyst. So government is sort of what creates the spark between the public and private sectors, in a way that there's still a place there that government has particular responsibilities to make those possible. The Mount Pelerin Society, Milton Friedman, this is a kind of grossly oversimplified version of it, but they really believe in sort of getting government out. So ideally, someone like Paul Ryan or Jack Kemp, who was kind of his predecessor of sort of the compassionate conservative kind of ilk of Republican, their ultimate idea is that everything goes to the private sector. So like everything ultimately becomes privatized in a way that this version does not believe in. They still believe in this idea of government playing some particular role, but it's a more limited role than you would see under a more kind of socially democratic party. And I think what I argue in the book is that actually, like, I really believe that intent matters. So you could say that the outcome is exactly the same. You still have poor people in a position where the social safety net is eviscerated. There's vast inequalities in all kinds of ways, but it's actually really important to understand what they were trying to do. And a lot of these programs, be it looking to the tech and promoting the tech industry and various different forms of deregulation, the idea was this was actually going to help people.
Where are we? Is that epoch? Are we done with that era? I mean, are we too close to really be able to say it's definitively over? But is it? And I know this isn't, as a historian, I'm asking you to project into the future. But in 15 years from now, are historians going to start to say, like, okay, it ended in, I don't know, the second decade of the 20th century, this started to end? 20,
Well,
22nd.
I think about this, and I would be curious of both of your thoughts too on it. In my mind, it's culturally over to some degree. I mean, you don't have this. The Democratic Party did not in the 2020 election promote things like charter schools and all of the kind of market programs like micro enterprise that were so sort of quintessential. And I do think Obama did do a lot of that in the mid, 2010 to 2012. And this kind of culturally, tech doesn't hold the same place that it once did. But I still think they're still holding. It's affected policy in various different ways, and it's had long-term effects on the ability to create certain kinds of policies. So while I see sort of someone like Biden is not using that kind of language, I think the impact has still been there, and I do think there's the potential for those things to come back, given sort of who holds power, and that's what's kind of dangerous. I think also the other place that's quite if you think about it just in terms of the Democratic Party, the other kind of component of this is that the Democrats go time and time again back to this political strategy. So as the DLC is shut its doors and they don't, Bill Clinton's not the marquee speaker anymore at conventions, there's still at every election, there's the idea that like, if we need to win, we should not be trying to kind of shore up marginalized people, but instead the solution to the Democrats winning office is to go after moderate suburbanites. And that's what happened in 2018. And I very much see that that's the way that the party seems to be turning right now.
Well, they
with
seem
fears
to
of losing them.
yeah, I mean, it's the whole conversation about means testing the student loan debt. They are trying to appeal to that constituency that you talk about there, and that this is Biden's political ideology. And I think, as you say, culturally we've moved on, and COVID, I think, was the death nail for it in terms of, anybody a little bit younger and who's voting Democratic. But Biden is still very much committed to that, or he knows no other way, really.
Yeah, and I think he there's some level of like we need to do more because I think there are two things going on. I think absolutely like one piece is that unlike the 90s, you do actually have a powerful left wing pushing back in a way that there was just that voice was absent for a number of reasons in the 90s. But I think what's important is that Biden was a founding member of the DLC, and I think he's less ideological in many ways than Bill Clinton was. But a lot of the people who are his senior advisors are people like Bruce Reed, Gene Sperling, who are all heavily invested in this approach. And so there's a question of like that maintaining that affecting policy in various different ways. And always, I think, taking those approaches of like, we need to both in terms of like, that's the right approach, but also this is the way to win for us to win and maintain power.
I just want to touch on that dichotomy you just talked about. You have an ideological element that, the Bruce Reeds, and then you have this sort of like political strategic one. What's the sequencing there? I mean, obviously, like if I have this ideology, I'm going to seek out consultants who are going to say, like, actually, strategically, this meshes, right? Like, do we ever see a break? In other words, could we make an assessment right now that the White House is full of? Because I think I think Joe Biden is marginally relevant to relative to honestly to the people that he's surrounded himself with or who have accrued. And so like Bruce Reed and one or two other advisors may be just as important on some level, depending on who's countering them in the White House. I think there's an argument right now about student debt that probably plays this out. And you have both the policy people and the ideologues and the political people who are talking about how this is going to impact the politics. How much of that distinction is there through this story? And is there a sense that one of those cohorts can exist without the other? I mean, because I think we're sort of probably still have more of those people who believe this stuff politically and don't ideologically are not as married to it or may not be, but it's irrelevant because they're mercenaries on some level, and they've found a way that they make their money with this political advice, as opposed to these ideologues, which I think at this point has to be largely, like just completely bankrupt. I mean, whether it's like the Gates Foundation, Rand Corporation saying like, your whole school choice, your whole school program was a disaster. You don't have the Arnie Duncans anymore. You have them out. You don't have the Cass Sunsteins in this administration. It seems like the political people for the large part are still there, but not necessarily the ideologues.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And so it's an interesting point because of that, with that dimension. And I do think some people like Bruce Reed and Gene Sperling have shown some capacity for change, but they're not hardcore going after the kinds of programs that they did in the 1990s. And so a recognition that that's not sort of suited for the moment. But it is an issue of like, for genuinely trying to combat inequality, that canceling student debt would be a really critical way to get there. So if you actually believe in policies that want to achieve those results, that is how you go about it. And there's been we've seen real limitations of doing that. And so I do think that there is this place of particular kinds of political strategists making decisions. And I think I think the other thing that's different about the 90s, and I will go back to my point of like, as I said, I started out saying like the Republicans don't matter, but like, I do think they do matter. I mean, I think that what's happened, the Republican Party has changed so dramatically in many ways since the 1990s, that is a force to contend with too. And I think they're very afraid of that. And very afraid of kind of what the Republicans look like, even though in many ways that like you would think in some ways opening up the fact that there's no potential for bipartisan cooperation could actually lead to some programs. And something like student debt, they don't need to go through Congress for. So it's like it is a thing of like this is not appealing to our perceived white suburbanite who we need to win. We need to maintain Congress, and so therefore we're not going to do it.
Lily Geismer, Associate Professor of History at Claremont McKenna College. The book is Left Behind: The Democrats' Failed Attempt to Solve Inequality. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks.
Same here.
Let me read this IM. It's just popped up.
Okay.
And it's from Smooth Jizz Trumpet, which is appropriate for the quality of this comment. Why are you just raining down hell on Democrats, Sam? There are two parties, and one is a theocratic, fascistic one. Why suppress potential Democratic voters? Unreal. All right. First off, let me start with the first sentence. Why are you just raining down hell on Democrats? I don't think we're raining down hell on Democrats.
Someone else should write in and talk about how we just need to come to terms with the fact that the Democrats are trying to lose on purpose.
Well,
I can't really like decide which way
the
show is biased.
I just want to address this one here.
Yeah.
We're not raining hell down on Democrats, A. Okay, but I understand the need for hyperbole in that. We're also not just doing anything. At the beginning of this show, we were pretty aggressive in talking about the Republican-controlled Supreme Court. I don't know if you've seen any of the other 250 shows that we've done this year in the past, 365 days, or frankly, any of the other shows for 12 years. The idea that the Republican Party's theocratic, fascistic one, I would point you to my 2006 book called FUBAR, America's Right-Wing Nightmare, where I had, with Steve and Cheryl, in a attempted humorous way, to say, this is what's happening with the Republican Party. So the idea, I'm not in any way not on board or aware of the idea of the Republican Party as the theocratic one. But the idea also that we're suppressing potential Democratic voters, what the is just, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind.
This is a sentiment that's going around, though. I had somebody banned in the chat, not with that name. I think their name was Daniel, but they said we were having a wine and cheese party, and that you two plus Lily, were going to deliver the election for the GOP.
Yeah, that's insane.
Wine and cheese party sounds nice.
Because anybody who has the limited intelligence to look at the critique of the Democrats through the 90s and into this century and decide I should vote for Republicans, does not have the intelligence to find the show in the first place.
Yeah.
So you're wrong.
Yeah,
Two things can be simultaneously true. One, I would never vote for Republicans because they are insane. They are theocratic, fascistic. They have one solitary agenda, which is to suppress a huge swath of the American public. And then the other thing is that in many respects, the Democratic Party has failed to live up to its potential role as a party that could deliver social change, justice, and equality, economic equality. Those two themes have been consistent on this program for 18 years. And I challenge anyone to argue otherwise. I have always said over the course of these 18 years, I don't care about the Democratic Party other than it is the best option that we have in our limited options to inhibit Republicans and to provide the type of social change and economic change that I want. And so, if you can't grasp those two ideas, which are not contradictory, my suggestion to you is don't watch this show because it's going to blow your mind in such a way that it might ultimately hurt your synapses.
Dems are trash often, and a lot of times you should vote for them anyway, and most of the time, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, you have two choices more often than not. On a local level, it's conceivable also in some congressional races, you may have a viable third option, and I will say that viable third option, if they're good, they're going to end up caucusing with the Democrats anyways, because they're not going to caucus with the Republicans.
And they're at least not going to spend their entire campaign shitting on people who vote Democrat for harm reduction purposes.
Right. And so I think, I don't even know, I won't address this on a regular basis, but, every now and then people need to need a new, we need to sort of refresh people's memories. But it is quite clear to me that we need a different democratic leadership. And one of the ways that you can achieve that is by voting for some of the younger, more reformist-minded Democrats. Are they going to be perfect? No. Because that only happens in fairy tales and Disney movies. It's grown-up time.
Like that's for me as a North Dakotan. Like you're expecting the Democrat to not be exciting. Like I don't know. It maybe I've been spoiled that way to not expect much from electoral politics, but also not to like. I think the people that want to like abstain and act like if we abstain once that will solve it are also putting too much hope in electoral politics.
They're insane.
Yeah,
they're insane. And you know what is the way you change people's mind about that is say 2016, 2004, 2010. I mean, it's just going on. Like anybody who's like of voting age has seen perfect examples of that failure. And the best part is, 2016 was supposed to be that one of those. I'm going to abstain and teach the Democrats a lesson. Democrats lose. I didn't have anything to do with it.
Don't look at me.
Don't look at me. Like, wait a second. That was your plan. Why are you even in what?
That was your moment to say, okay,
I
now
did
you
this.
listen to
Yeah,
us.
exactly. But the bottom line is like, that's not the way it works. No. That's not the way it works. You don't teach them a lesson. You build power that takes them over. That's it. So like we already taught them a lesson.
They wanted a shortcut.
Oh, they didn't vote for us. We better do Medicare for all now.
Yeah. Oh God. Might I recommend interviewing Amain Badhaso, who's running against Betty McCollum in Minnesota? Seems like a solid progressive. Will you put that down on the list too? We had someone else too from California. All right, folks, just a reminder, we are now 6 days away, 6 days away from our live Boston show.
I know.
If you're gonna go, now is the time to buy your ticket. Majority live. Still a couple of tickets left.
And it's supposed to be gorgeous
in
Boston. Gorgeous.
Walk down
70s and 80s.
Jeez, I can't even remember. I forgot the name of the river off of Starro Drive.
Isn't it the Charles?
Yeah, Charles River. You can walk down to Charles River. Maybe you walk down there, and then you walk down to the Boston Common. Maybe go on a swan boat. After you get off the swan boat, you go over to the Wilbur, watch the show, come back out. It'll still be a beautiful day. You can hang out at the Common, go back on the swan boat. And I don't know if they still have that duck boat now, that obnoxious like amphibian vehicle. Do they still have
Does it
those?
quack?
No, it just like it walks. They drive into the water and then they drive out. I don't know. You could do that too, and then go see if you can find the Cheers bar. Yeah. Majority Live. Also, amquickie.com. Check it out, folks. It's our daily news blast. You get the top stories of the day and a number every morning in your email box. What else we got going? Become a member. It is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityReport.com. Just a reminder, if you're a member, you want to watch the Fun Half live, your YouTube should automatically populate, and we put a link in the description just in case. And if you're a member and you're having trouble finding the YouTube, you go sign in to the site at majority.fm, or just look at your member feed that you get on your app and click on the description in there, and that will take you to the YouTube as well. So it's in the majority.fm site. Right at the top of that day's post will be the link. Matt! Rob from Dedham says the Cheers bar is horrible. Awful recommend. Oh, yeah, no, it's... I don't know. Do people even still go to that? I mean, Cheers was like 80 years ago.
Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name.
Yeah, they don't. It's just a...
I want to go
you go on the Freedom Trail. You go to Quincy Market.
I'm looking for dispensary recommendations also.
Faneuil Hall.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Faneuil Hall, Quincy Market, same place. Go down there, get some chowder from Legal Seafood or some clams on the half shell. Matt, what book are you going to listen to the audio version of as you walk around Boston?
I haven't actually even thought about that. Probably maybe some
Revolutionary War
the
stuff.
Cemetery down there.
stuff.
You're gonna follow the Freedom Trail.
Yeah, there's a couple trails apparently. There's the Red Line one, and then there's another like more based one. Apparently, people tell me about.
Go to Chinatown, the former red light district area down there.
Ooh, that'd be fun. I did get a new Celtics hat.
Newbury Comics. You know, you could probably bought a Celtics hat in Boston too.
Yeah, but you know if you're gonna run out of time or something.
Yep. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
So if you want to see how people build power outside of the Democrats, it's not like Tulsi Gabbard or the Boogaloo Boys, as some people like to suggest. I would recommend our interview on Left Reckoning with Robin Wansley, who's an independent socialist on city council Minneapolis. Also, we talked with Adam and Jacob from the Valley Labor Report for patrons, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, about the Alabama governor's race, where Tim James is primary and Kim Ivey, and he got the union workers, the mine workers support there, basically because the Alabama Democrats are nowhere to be seen, which is a big problem. So Tim James can go into a union hall and say a couple words about the mine workers and then do about 30 minutes on CRT. It's a problem that there's not an active Democratic Party down there. So we talked with them about how they're going to have to probably vote in the primary of the GOP because there's not really anything going on with the Democrats. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that conversation.
All right, we'll head to the fun half. Just one more IM. Slappy Tubbs, you say the leaked SCOTUS opinion is to shore up the wavering right-wingers on the bench, but have you considered that maybe it was leaked to signal to state legislatures to fire up and get ready to pass laws to ban abortion as soon as the decision is made in June? They were already doing this. They were already doing it. They don't need that extra 2 months. They were already doing it. Yes, it was called the combat zone. That's right. All right, folks. See you in the fun half. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second. Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone? Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second. Now let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is this?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports.
We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Who libertarians? They're so stupid, though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-3501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
654 $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes with satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a goose.